repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. We'll do the short mandala offering. Most of you are familiar with this prayer. It's just an opportunity for us to make an offering to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, all of our gurus, so that we can achieve realizations of this topic. So we covered this prayer in the last one that I taught, the last Discovering Buddhism module that I taught before I had my 6 months teaching for other centers in Module 8. So again, just recite this prayer in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, refuge and bodhicitta before the teaching. Again, these are also topics that we've covered in this course of Discovering Buddhism. The idea of finding safe direction in the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or Supreme Assembly, those beings who have gained realizations of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. And then the second part of this, where we think that we're here engaging in these teachings together so that we can become enlightened. And we'll meditate on this motivation in a moment, but already bringing that to mind. So let's recite this. I think we'll just do it in English 3 times today. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So I'm sorry, Mary, I jumped in with the prayers and put them on screen, and I know you have them as well in a file. So for the closing prayers, I'll let you do that. And probably they're easier to read. I think it's a little bit larger, the text, so some of you may be squinting at the screen like me. So all right. So again, welcome everyone. Let's do a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day already or from the week. And then on the basis of a bit calmer mind, we'll set our motivation together. So again, we're going to talk about concentration in the beginning of this class because it's an important topic to revisit in the light of this wisdom of emptiness. So I will be going over a bit more about meditation as part of this course. But know that again, we're in this first part of meditation, we're mostly trying to make the mind very stable and calm by focusing on something that is with us all the time, which is our breath. If you can generate another object that you want to meditate on, a visualized object, you're welcome to do that. But I think the breath is easiest for most of us. And then just tune into the breath in whatever way works for your mind. Again, I generally suggest if you don't have a particular way that you already work with the breath, working with this area around the nostrils where you feel the sensation of the air coming in and out. And just make that your meditation object, staying present there as best as you can. And whenever you check in and notice that the mind has wandered from the breath, then at that time let go of whatever it was that distracted you and bring the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the chime to begin the meditation period, again a few minutes in silence, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection. So now let's set our motivation for today's class. Again, this subject that we're going to be studying in this course is a very profound one that the Buddha discerned through his own wisdom, and that all the Buddhas who have ever existed have known this truth. But we ourselves and all sentient beings are still under control of ignorance, which is the direct opposing force to this wisdom. And this wisdom is generated as the antidote to overcoming that ignorance. So we'll be exploring this more in this course. But this is the understanding that we have behind the generation of our motivation to engage in these teachings, especially this motivation of bodhicitta, is that we see that first of all, we ourselves are still under the control of this confusion, this ignorance. We aren't seeing things correctly. We aren't seeing things as they really are. And it's due to this obscuration that we ourselves are suffering, that we ourselves are going from life to life. So the initial level of motivation, and one that the Buddha taught as a completely valid one, is to want to achieve this wisdom of emptiness so that we ourselves can be free from that confusion. We can know things as they truly are, and in that way remove all of what is causing our own suffering. But because we also acknowledge that all other beings are under the control of this same factor of ignorance, it would be really quite selfish and narrow-minded of us to be solely concerned about our own welfare, to engage in these studies simply for our own liberation, when we recognize that all beings have that same confusion, but moreover, all beings can generate this wisdom and can be free from that and all their afflictions, all of what is keeping them going from life to life in this unsatisfactory state. And moreover, all of these beings have been so important to us in terms of what they have provided us in life after life. All the things that we have, we depend upon others in order to have them. And even the merit that we create that allows us to have a good life like this, to have all the good things that we have, that comes from practicing actions towards others. So we need others. Others are a key part of our own welfare. So recognizing that beings are under the control of this confusion and can be free from it, and moreover that they have been very dear and kind to you, generate the wish to benefit all of them as well. This mind that we call bodhicitta, that is intent upon actualizing your own potential to become a Buddha, to go beyond your own liberation, to attain that state of perfect enlightenment, so that in that state, you then can perfectly work for the benefit of all sentient beings. Upon attaining the state of Buddhahood, you will then have the perfect wisdom, the perfect compassion, and even the perfect power and skillful means to know exactly how to benefit all beings perfectly. So hold that thought, that aspiration, so that what we do here today, as well as throughout this course, becomes the cause not just for our own freedom from suffering, but for all beings to know that state and to achieve their greatest potential. And welcome everyone. So good to see you all today on this Saturday morning. And so again, we're going to be doing this course, and I'll go through the plan for today is I'm going to do a very brief little introduction. We are going to watch one of the videos. Even though I realize that we could all do this on our own on our computer, I think it's kind of nice to watch it together and then to see what questions people might have afterwards. So then we'll take a little break right after that. And then when I return, I'll do a short little teaching that kind of gets us into this subject matter a little bit. And then I'll do at the very end kind of an overview of some of the materials that are out there. Mary Mogenberg loaded all of the materials that I've given her for this course, and I want to make sure that you kind of know which ones pertain to this particular session and how everything will sort of unfold. So we'll go through kind of the logistics at the end of this. So this course is part of, as I mentioned earlier, the series that the FPMT put together called Discovering Buddhism. It is a course that you can take part in whatever way suits your mind. If you want to simply come to the classes and participate in that way, that's perfectly fine. If you would like to do more reading in addition, as well as meditations, other things that you can do that will help your study, then you're certainly welcome to do that. And there are some people who actually take on all of that, doing all of that extra study with an aim for applying for certification, essentially to get a certificate of completion upon going through all of Discovering Buddhism and the additional practices that are required, as well as then potentially the ability to teach this at some point, which of course is not a guarantee, but it's certainly a possibility if people do complete this study and have a good working knowledge of these topics and are wanting to teach, then certainly there may be that opportunity. So just know that I'll talk a little bit about that later at the tail end, but know that if that's something that interests you, maybe get in touch with Mary or myself, and we'll make sure that you get all the materials to be able to, yeah, kind of fill out your own little card of keeping track of what you did and didn't do or whatever. So it's just a nice way to make sure that that happens. And you can start that at any point. If you're new to discovering Buddhism and you want to just get a feeling for it, you could do it the next time that this begins again and engage in it in that way. But know that it's meant to be a very comprehensive study of this tradition's way of approaching the path to enlightenment, which is essentially what we call the Lam Rim, the stages of the path or the graduated path. Lam in Tibetan means path, Rim means graded or gradual. And so it is meant to be fairly experiential, this whole course, to give you a flavor for these teachings. It's not like it has an introductory nature, certainly, but it's not shying away from those things that we need to get into if we're really going to understand the way the path to enlightenment is set out. So topics like karma and of course emptiness that we're studying here, death, all these things come into play as part of the topics of the Discovering Buddhism. So let me give a very short little introduction to the Lam Rim, the three sort of levels of the Lam Rim, and then we can go watch the video and proceed from there. So the three levels of the stages of the path, most of you are familiar with this, but essentially we have a couple of preliminary topics that sometimes come before these. One is to understand the importance of having met with the teachings through the kindness of our teachers, and the other is having attained this human life in which we can practice the Dharma through what we have in terms of an intellect that can investigate these teachings and so on. The three levels of the path that proceed from recognizing that preciousness of our own human life, as well as the good fortune we have at having met the Dharma through the kindness of our teachers, is to practice these three levels that are meant to be a hierarchy. In the same way that we could say in our general education system in the United States, we have grade school or elementary school, then we have high school. Sometimes they have middle school in there as well, but essentially you have kind of the more advanced learning that you go to after completing your elementary learning. And then you have even the greater advanced teachings, which would be in university, colleges, what have you. And sometimes that even has graduate school and what have you. But nonetheless, if we look at it from that point of view, if we were to want a child, for example, to go and be in college, we'd say, well, I want my 5-year-old to go to college. Well, you wouldn't take your 5-year-old to UNM and say, here, I want to enroll my 5-year-old in, to get in a degreed program to study, whatever, biology. You know that the child at 5 years old doesn't have all the learning that's necessary to practice and study at that level. So it's very much the same in terms of the Lam Rim. You're meant to sort of go through it in a very gradual way. First, the most basic teachings, which have to do with primarily adopting an understanding of the law of karma. And those are teachings that help us to recognize that this life is only one of a continuity of beginningless rebirths, and it will continue to go on because there is a continuity of the mind. That is the thread that connects all of these lives. So when we get to the end of this life, which is the first topic we study in the graduated path of small capacity, the person of the least capacity, we become aware of our own death and the reality of impermanence. We recognize that if we don't tend to this life well, we could end up in an unfortunate state, such as an animal, which, animals share this world with us so we can see what their lives are like. Some of our pets have very cushy lives, but most animals are living, pretty awful lives. Lots of fear, lots of danger, lots of trying to keep themselves alive to survive. But anyway, we can get some appreciation for the potential that we have to fall to one of those lower rebirths. So then we make a determination to find protection from that, which is refuge, which I mentioned earlier in the prayer. Finding safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, especially the Dharma, and in particular within the Dharma, the teachings on karma. Teachings on karma are what show us how we are in charge. We are the creators of our own experiences. So I'm not going to go into, again, all these topics in depth, but know that these are all what preceded this module in particular. Was some of them at the beginning of discovering Buddhism that give a good training in those ideas. Those are what support the whole concept of getting a good rebirth. If we know the rules and know how to create that, then we simply put our energy into doing that through that deep refuge and that commitment to avoiding non-virtue and engaging in virtue. The second level, which is called, again, the graduated path of the middle capable being. Again, I don't necessarily need to put this back on the screen, but I will at this point, the person of middling capacity. Here, someone is more advanced beyond the first level, and they're looking at the big picture. They're looking at what is going on in terms of the cycle of rebirth, what we call samsara, and wanting to attain freedom from that, which is the state we call nirvana. So there actually is only one module of Discovering Buddhism that covers that entire middle scope, or the person of middling capacity. And that's module 9, which I think was taught earlier this year. So yeah, I taught on module 8. And then module 8 was more or less kind of a filler that looks at practice and how we generate a daily practice. But module 9 gets into the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, which was the Buddha's way of setting out the reality of our situation, the truth of dukkha, that we do have this state that we are in, that we need to recognize if we're ever going to move away from it, the truth of the causes of that, which are within our own minds, our own delusions, which of course are rooted in ignorance, this confusion that we're going to be addressing in this course in particular. And then also the actions that we engage in on the basis of that. So those two, the first two truths, tell us what our situation is. The other two truths tell us that we can have an end to that if we practice the path, if we engage in good morality, have deep concentration, generate wisdom, especially the wisdom of emptiness that we're talking about here, then we can be free. We can know that freedom from all of our suffering. So those teachings and other teachings in that category help support the whole idea of what the big picture is, what we are involved in. So at this level, we're only simply generating the wish for us to achieve that ourselves, to have liberation and individual sort of perspective on that. Then we went on to the person of great capacity, and this is where we had the modules on bodhicitta, which Kendall Magnuson just taught the last few months. There was a module on the transforming our problems, working with the bodhicitta motivation around our difficulties that I believe Scott Tusa taught. So those kind of give us this bigger perspective to the situation in terms of we've understood our own situation well. We have to open our hearts to others in order to achieve our greatest potential, which is Buddhahood, as we meditated on earlier. We have to remove all of what obscures us from achieving that, which is initially this ignorance that is seeing things incorrectly, and then, of course, also to remove any other imprints of this that are causing us to have a block to achieving that omniscient state of a Buddha. So this is what we're going to be looking at in this course, in particular, Module 12, in terms of the numbers of the Discovering Buddhism modules. There's really only one other teaching module after this. It's the module on Tantra, and Tantra is an extension of that motivation of the person of great capacity, but with the recognition that we need a technique to become enlightened even more quickly because beings are suffering so greatly. So this is will be taught in the new year, probably, I believe, by Shanka Mitra, who is moving here from California. He lived in North Carolina, which is where I met him originally, and he's taught Discovering Buddhism a number of times before, and was the SPC at Vajrapani. Anyway, he'll be a very qualified teacher to guide you into study of Tantra. I think he's teaching it. If not him, then Venerable Rabina, perhaps. I don't remember who was lined up to teach that in January. So that's where we're at, is we're sort of at the tail end of all of this in terms of the three scopes. We're in the last one, and we're looking at this wisdom that is a part of the practices of a bodhisattva, a being who has that motivation of becoming a Buddha for the sake of others. So this is the context for these teachings. So let me go ahead and share again, Discovering Buddhism, just so you have a little kind of information about the course. It was put together about 20 years ago. Was actually over in Italy studying at District de Lama Tsongkhapa when they had a teachers conference where they were working on this, and they had all these wonderful teachers there. Venerable Rabina was there, Kathleen MacDonald was there, all these great teachers from the FPMT, and they were all working very diligently on trying to put together, flesh out what this course looked like. And then they got it off the ground very quickly afterwards. And part of it was to put together these 25-minute videos which give a taste for each of these subjects. And so this one is really quite nice and has a number of teachers. Venerable Rabina is there, Jan Willis, a few other folks. And so again, it gives us a feeling of the variety of topics that we're going to be looking at in regard to this wisdom of emptiness. So I'm going to go ahead and show the video. I do need to make sure that I have the sound on. Yes, good. So hopefully you can all see this. If not, then please put something in the chat box if you can't see or hear this so that I know and not kind of going full steam ahead with this without all of you being able to take part. So.
Most of the time, life appears to us to be completely solid and permanent. We believe this fixed view of our bodies and our thoughts and the projections of our lives and the world around us. Believe it's all true. According to Buddhism, this habit of misapprehending everything we experience is the root of all of our problems. In particular, when we think that I am real, solid, and unchanging, we put all of our energy into defending the happiness of this I at the cost of everything and everyone else. The Buddha realized this is the greatest ignorance we suffer from, and with his earth-shaking teachings on emptiness, he said, wait a minute, the world isn't as concrete as you think. Why don't you analyze what you call reality very, very carefully and check to see if it really exists the way you think. The truth is, nothing exists that it appears. And by realizing this, you'll create a happier situation for yourself and for others. This wisdom that realizes emptiness is extraordinary and has the power to free us at any moment.
The Buddha's wisdom teachings on emptiness are complex and difficult teachings, not easy to understand. It's particularly important that one prepares the mind before listening to these teachings with an appropriate motivation that opens the mind to being able to understand and absorb them. This is similar to tilling the soil of a garden in order to be able to plant the seeds of enlightenment. Therefore, now, in your mind, make a strong determination, generate a strong motivation to be able to traverse the spiritual path, to understand the Buddha's teachings on emptiness, in order to free yourself from the bonds of samsara and to reach enlightenment in order to be able to also free all suffering living beings.
Very important point, you see, to release our say, confused mind or the confusion, to cut our hallucination, this, the biggest suffering in our life, which continuation, this hallucination we had from beginning this is samsara rebirth, this hallucination, you see, the truly existence appearance, you see, that which is apprehended by the root of samsara, which is apprehended by the ignorance, the king of the delusion. See, the ignorance, the mind not knowing the ultimate nature of the phenomena, such as the mind not knowing ultimate nature of the I, which is the root of samsara. So therefore, this is a very essential point to essential point to know what is the false, what is the truth in your life. So in order to realize in this, first you have to recognize objective attribute, the false I, which is you have to recognize the false I, which is false. Which root the ignorance, not knowing what is I. Even though we think I 24 hours, we talk always I, like chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. We think I 24 hours. We say we think I, but do not know what is I. We fight for the I. We fight for this I. We kill other people. We kill even for this I. Even we have to kill people, other people, other sentient beings. Create so many, give so many harms. Killing, stealing, sexual conduct, telling lies, so many harms to give so many harms to others for this I, for to protect this I, for the happiness of this I, to give happiness to this I. But we do not know, but no idea what is I. No knowledge of what is I. This false I is the inherently existing I that which appear to you, even though it's merely labeled, but appear you not merely labeled. So this is there, this appearance there, from beginningless rebirth up to now, but you never recognized that that is false.
I suppose the ultimate analysis to overcome attachment is to analyze the nature of I. And also, you know, when we analyze the nature of self, or the persons we are attached to, like I mentioned before, we can't pinpoint the real person there that we are attached to. So we end up with a sense of emptiness, you know? And not the ordinary emptiness, like an empty room, but just the emptiness of not being able to find that object of attachment. But that doesn't exist there in that person the way we perceive it. So when you experience the emptiness again, mind becomes very happy and relaxed. And the same when we analyze ourselves, you know. If we are in a state of attachment and greed for something, then one can analyze, where is this greedy me? You know? Where does this greedy me exist? How does it exist? So then you try to look. Is it my body? Is it my mind? You know, you try to investigate, where is this greedy me? Is it oneness with my mind? Am I greed? Am I in the nature of greed? Can't be, isn't it? Because then you would have to be greedy all the time. So I'm not my greed. My greed is just a moment, state of my mind. Okay? So who is greedy? You know, when you research inside, you can't pinpoint this independent self that is sitting there somewhere being greedy. It's completely not there. Again, emptiness, you know, space. Makes you feel happy. Suddenly, greed is gone because there's nobody there being greedy. And you know, the emptiness is the ultimate method to eliminate negative states of mind, because they are based on a false view, you know. When you research the correct view of the self, negativity goes, definitely goes. It has no foundation. It drops down, then wisdom comes. You know, with wisdom, these negative states of mind doesn't have a chance. And with wisdom you feel satisfied. It satisfies you, it makes you content. You feel good inside, you know. That's the ultimate solution to attachment and to negative states of mind. And this all have to be learned in meditation. So it's all part of meditation practice. But don't think that there are no methods to overcome negativities. In Buddhism, plenty of methods. It's just a matter of we need to practice it, you know.
According to Buddhism in general, you have the conventional mode of how things exist, which is the Davidness of David and the carpetness of carpet and the cupness of cups and like that. They've all got their own distinct conventional mode of existing, and they're all kind of within that context exist, conventionally speaking. Then you have the ultimate or final mode of existence of things, okay? And that's, if you like, the same for everything. So ultimately, Buddha would say, you cannot find inherent, self-existent glassesness. Glasses are empty of being inherent, findable, real, in and of themselves glassesness, which is how we grasp at everything, Buddha would say, due to this fundamental ignorance in our mind. It is empty of that, and empty in this sense simply means lacking that type of existence. But the ignorance within our mind, Buddha is saying, which is completely pervasive, absolutely clings to that, believes it, sees it 1,000,000,000% unceasingly. And it's a total, big, fat, rotten lie. And it's the mother of all lies, the cause of all suffering, the cause of universes, finally, the cause of everything. Okay, Buddha says, It is empty of all of this. Ultimately, you cannot find glasses. Ultimately, there is no glasses from its own side. There's no David from its own side. There's no carpet from its own side. There's no kaka from its own side. The emptiness of everything, the emptiness of kaka and the emptiness of you is the same. All are empty or lack an ultimate reality, a final a findable inherentness. Conventionally, nevertheless, we indeed can point to glasses, not a problem. There are glasses there, and it would be very stupid to call it a cup. You'd be in trouble. Coffee would burn you. So the thing is, right now, there's this huge contradiction when we hear about, oh, there are glasses. Grasp. No, sorry, there are no glasses. Oh my God, chuck them out with the bathwater. We go too far. We have these two extreme ways of seeing. So we either cling to everything as having an inherent eternalistic nature. Now, interestingly, philosophically speaking, Buddhism would say that Christianity and Hinduism and Islam have this view. Just talking philosophically, not being sectarian here. Okay? Have the view of real, solid, self-existent something, real, solid, self-existent out there God, real, solid, self-existent soul. Buddhism would assert that it's not possible to be this. Buddhism would argue with the Christian and say, you've got the wrong end of the stick. Yes, there's God, but Buddha, but it's interdependent. Everyone can become it, like I was saying before. It's just a philosophical discussion. And that the view we have of self-existent God out there and soul and absolute and permanent and inherent is a product of this fundamental ignorance that posits that, therefore doesn't see this. So these two extreme views we have, either the nihilistic one, chuck the baby out with the bathwater, or, oh, grasp, you know? And these are the instinctive ways that our mind thinks now. So what Buddha says is there's this view that ultimately there is no glasses, but the more you understand how there is glasses conventionally in its appropriate way, the more you get that it's empty. And the more you realize how there is no glasses from its own side, the more it helps you understand conventional. Okay, the shorthand for conventional reality is dependent arising. That means it's a dependent arising. It arose in dependence upon causes and conditions. Now, karma is causes and conditions for me. Right now, because of ignorance in my mind, I cling to and believe in a self-existent, real, solid, out here, schizophrenic, separate, made by somebody else, hopeless victim me-ness, which gives rise to attachment and anger and pride and jealousy and all the suffering, right? All coming from this fundamental ignorance, this fundamental misconception that is the exact opposite of the truth, that I'm a completely interdependent scenario. So because everything is empty, there can be even karma. Therefore, there is no real glasses. Therefore, there is no real Rabina, self-existent, solid, poor victim, mean, nasty, horrible David. They are the creations of ignorance.
The way suffering ends is it ends through insight. And it's the insight that comprehends exactly how it is that the self actually exists. It's the insight that shows us, that tells us directly that this self is impermanent, exists in dependence on other things, not independently and all in its own right. And so with that, having gained insight about how we ourselves exist, we can put a complete end, we can burst asunder the ignorance that was the root cause of samsara. Therefore, gaining wisdom is equivalent with gaining enlightenment. The wisdom that realizes the actual nature of how things exist is a wisdom realizing this famous principle in Buddhism, shunyata, variously translated in English, emptiness, voidness. And some people say, well, seems like a despairing kind of religion, Ooh, pessimistic. Oh, there's nothing. Nihilistic. Oh, there's nothing. Oh, so, But in fact, in Shunyata is the emptiness, voidness of what? Buddhists go on, They go on. You have to find out of what something is empty. Oh, and then there's nothing mysterious at all. There's nothing mysterious about it. I am, you are, every single thing, all selves and all things in existence are empty of an independent existence. That's all. Therefore, it's simple, you see. Therefore, things are not independent. Therefore, things are dependent and interconnected. All things are connected, So the wisdom that comes to see selflessness or emptiness or voidness immediately experiences, and so we can feel these things. It's direct and unmediated knowledge. Immediately feels our connection with all things. So why would I think about harming that other person? He's me, Why would I think about chopping down that tree? It's me, So it's in our relationship with all other things, And compassion springs from this. There's no way to hold it back.
On a conceptual level, I think it's really important to explore the nature of emptiness from a logical point of view. That it's impossible that we exist in our own separate islands and that we exist from our own side totally. We are dependent arisings. Everything about us is dependent on a previous moment and dependent on causes and conditions. And that's the same with everything supposedly out there, is also not there from its own side. It's not powered from purely its own side. It has no concrete longevity to it. We're all in process. We all have a prior cause. We're all in movement, moving to a new effect, which is the cause of the next effect. There's nothing concrete about any of this. And the appearance of concreteness is ignorance. That's the thing we're fighting. Now, the essential antidote to that is to at least have a strong belief in emptiness. That things are empty of inherent existence. They're empty of that solidity. There's empty of a me-ness, of a you-ness, of an I-ness. And when you take that, as His Holiness says, you take the mantra of me, I, out of the mental sphere, it has an incredible transformative effect. Also, you start to understand the interconnectedness of all things. Even on the simplest level, there's nothing that we see around us that we did totally ourselves. Now, being able to detach a little bit, having some experience of emptiness, even if it's imaginative, you can detach from that kind of identification with emotion and with mindsets that create a kind of static solidity to all events and situations. So clearly, as an actor, I got to be able to do that all the time, moving in and out of seemingly operatic, emotional, and conceptual situations, and try to maintain a sense of cleanliness about it all. That it is, in the end, just a narrative. It's just a story. And the story comes and it goes. But that space that it emerges from remains. That is solid. And that's that space of openness and clarity, of knowing is uncontained, has no center, has no boundaries. Yeah. So again, the more that you're able to see this kind of dreamlike, illusory nature of this narrative that kind of emerges and intoxicates us in these kind of mysterious, magical ways. If you can see that for what it is, at the same time generating a stability in this other space, which is much more expansive and certainly loving, life's problems tend to fall away.
I think it helps me get less emotional about things. Not dull or indifferent, but just less attached to my feelings towards something, because how I'm seeing it is only according to my karma. And if I like it, then I can be happy with my karma. If I don't like it, I can be unhappy with my karma. But having the emptiness is like, I think that's a real refuge. That's the liberating part. Knowing that what I see, if it's horrible and terrible, I'm having a bad time, it's okay. It's just what I'm experiencing right now. Nothing to do with reality. Nothing to do with something that is there. If I really take refuge, I think it's really taking refuge in the emptiness of myself, of everyone, and of the things I see.
My microphone back down here. So were there any questions on the video or anything that anyone wanted to say from having watched that? It's interesting to see how youthful everyone is in those videos. Did you notice Eloise, by the way, from Taos? She was in one scene. And
Yeah,
Rachel, of course.
and Amy Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even Rowena. What is that? Was that about 10, 12 years ago?
It was 20 years ago, almost.
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah.
explains it. Yeah.
Because I think these were filmed around 2001 to 2002, somewhere right in there. So even, yeah, of course, all the numbers that they say 26 years or whatever, I mean, all those have to be changed in terms of the duration of time since they were first made. But
Yeah, it was interesting. And Richard Gere, too.
yeah, definitely.
Enjoyed revisiting it.
Yeah, it's nice. So again, there were a number of things touched on that we'll certainly get into in this course. So if you don't have questions yet, you probably will at some point as we go through this material. But let's go ahead. It's 11:30 now. Let's go ahead and take our little 5-minute break. I want to say 10 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes. I think we have gives a little more time to stretch and what have you. And then when I'll ring the bell from my end. So if you do wander away from your device or whatever, you may hear it if you leave your speaker on. All right, so I'll see you in about 11:40. Okay. Okay. So So I also realized that we didn't do announcements at the beginning of class, which was also my oversight. Did you want to do that, Mary? We could pause the recording if you wanted to make any announcements. It's up to you. Go back into, okay, good. So were there any final questions from the video? Anything that anyone needed to ask or share? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so let's go forward then. So the topic for today is really just to introduce this. I won't be going into really in-depth teachings on emptiness today, though the meditation that I'm going to encourage you to work with over the next week is already touching a little bit on this idea of what is it that really exists? What is the nature of this I? Because obviously this sense of a person or an I, as was pointed out in the video, is where our ignorance takes root mostly. So let me go ahead and put back on the slides, and I do want to share the next slide, which is where this is situated in terms of, once more, I already gave you the grounding in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, in terms of this being in the graduated path for the great capable being, the person of greatest capacity. So this is where we have the Bodhisattva, the being who is motivated by bodhicitta. And the task of this being, which we'll be actually going into more tomorrow as well, this is what that Transcending Our Limitations course is about, is looking at the 6 perfections. I covered the first 2, generosity and morality, the beginning of this year. And these are where the Bodhisattva's practice begins, is by engaging in acts of giving and so on, as well as practicing good morality, a foundation of not harming others and so on. And then patience is where we're going to pick up tomorrow, actually. And patience, of course, is a huge topic, something that we really need a lot of assistance in developing within our minds, the patience that is able to bear harm and so forth. And then the 4th one, which is joyous effort, this enthusiasm for our practice. So I'll be talking about all 4 of those a bit, well, not the first 2, not quite so much, but the other 2 in the Sunday course for a while. Concentration and wisdom are said to be the most difficult of these 6. Concentration quite difficult, and wisdom, the perfection of wisdom, even more difficult to fathom and to practice. But these are the 2 I'm actually going to talk about a little bit in this course. Concentration only for really the next class. I'm going to try to cram that all into one class. It's a lot, but just talk a little bit about the techniques that are developed in this tradition for cultivating very deep, stable concentration, which is a foundation, a platform for our ability to discern wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness in particular, to a very deep degree. Wisdom itself, of course, is the main topic that we're looking at here, but I wanted to share with you a little bit from the transcripts of the teachings in the Discovering Buddhism at Home, or the online course now, as it's called, by Thupten Pende. Thupten Pende was a monk in our tradition early on. He was the education director for the FPMT, and he taught this course on emptiness. And so in regard to these 6 perfections, I'll leave them on the screen while I read this. He gave some advice about how to cultivate each of these 6 perfections within our study of this topic of emptiness. He says, you can practice all 6 while sitting and listening. You can practice generosity by listening, because we are acquiring knowledge in order to be able to have something to share with others. One of the forms of generosity that we talked about in the Sunday class at the beginning of the year was the giving of Dharma. This is such an important thing. If we listen to these teachings with the aim of benefiting others through our acquisition of this knowledge, this is a wonderful motivation to have. So that's the practice of generosity within your listening to these teachings. You can practice morality by restraining the mind from engaging in a wrong motivation for listening, such as listening for the sake of increasing your own self-importance, restraining from jealousy, from other negative states of mind. So try to listen with a pure mind in terms of your morality, not having a mind that is together with any of the afflictions, the afflicted states of pride and jealousy. Pride can be a big one. We can often get pride in our own understanding, and might even hear teachings being presented and we think, oh, I know that already. And that's a form of pride sometimes. It's really good to just be open, to be a sort of open slate to receive these teachings. That's a good practice of our morality. And certainly to use these teachings to benefit others, as was said with generosity. This is also a form of morality. Then he goes on to talk about patience. He says, patience, of course, is the ability to endure difficulties without getting upset. The main difficulty here is the discomfort of not understanding, where your mind is not working and you feel as if somebody is tightening a leather belt around your head. We have to endure these difficulties because otherwise, what do you do? Run away and have coffee and enjoy your day by going to the movies? We can't go to the movies now, but anyway, you could do this, but you would miss the opportunity. The solution is to practice patience. So one of the forms of patience that I will be going into a little bit in the Sunday course, because that's where we're picking up again on tomorrow, is the patience that is bearing difficulties, especially with regard to our practice of the Dharma. These teachings on emptiness can be very difficult. They're very profound, very hard to realize in some regard, in spite of Jan Willis's wonderful words of saying it's really pretty simple. There is a simplicity to it in some ways, but there's also a resistance that we have to embracing these teachings completely, to really getting to the level where we understand them very deeply. So this is how we apply patience within this course. Enthusiasm or joyous effort, you practice that, Thupten Pende says, while listening by enjoying the teaching. You enjoy the teachings by appreciating their value, such as how they open doors to happiness and develop your abilities. So we even saw that with regard to, I think it was Richard Gere who was saying it like releases this space of joy, or maybe it was one of the other teachers. But anyway, the idea behind this is that the teachings on emptiness, as difficult as they are, we should be joyously approaching this because this is the key. This is what will actually relieve our own suffering as well as the suffering of all beings. Concentration, you practice that, Thupten Pende says, while listening by not letting your minds wander. Listen to what is said and try to follow the reasoning. So concentration, even when we're listening to teachings, is a really important quality, to remain stable, to not let the mind wander so much to thinking about other things going on in your life or what have you. Try to be here and be as present. And then he says, of course, practicing wisdom while listening is discriminating the actual meaning of what is said from all the possibilities. This is the intelligence we apply when we think about what is said, the meaning of the words, both explicit and implicit, what the teacher intended by those words, by reasoning, examples, and stories. There are many possible meanings, such as what you think was meant and what others think was meant. There's a lot to think about. At the same time, in the midst of all that analysis, he says you still have to practice concentration. So again, we just have to develop this ability to stay focused, to be with the reasonings that we're going to go through, to develop our own wisdom, our own ability to discriminate. So I thought that was useful to maybe get us into this topic. I usually teach briefly on the 6 perfections at the tail end of the module introducing bodhicitta, which was the previous one that Kendall taught. So maybe she even touched on these 6 perfections to some degree. One thing to give context for these teachings is to briefly discuss the 3 key figures involved in the teachings on, concentration as well as emptiness, but primarily emptiness. And these are, again, not to say that there are no other great masters that filled in the gaps between these amazing teachers. Of course, the first one being Shakyamuni Buddha. His dates are obviously very disputed because at that time there wasn't a whole lot of, keeping track of dates. Even Nagarjuna, the second one on the list, his dates are in great dispute because some people even hold that Nagarjuna lived for some 600 years, which of course is unfathomable in our understanding of human biology and what have you. But there are said to be these techniques that you can develop through tantric practices that can allow you to have a longer life, to gain that siddhi or that accomplishment, that attainment. Then there's Lama Tsongkhapa, the last of these 3, who lived in the 14th century into the beginning of the 15th century, and whose tradition we follow in this school of Tibetan Buddhism. So let me talk a little bit about these 3 key figures of Shakyamuni Buddha, Nagarjuna, Lama Tsongkhapa. So Shakyamuni Buddha, of course, was the founder of this tradition of Buddhism, of all the Buddhist teachings in this world at this time. He's not the only Buddha. The word Buddha is referring to any being who's attained complete enlightenment. But he's a particular Buddha who had a very strong karma with the beings of this world and showed up in this world. And according to the Mahayana teachings, he demonstrated how to be on the path to enlightenment. So he appeared as Prince Siddhartha, and Prince Siddhartha, of course, the story is that he left his palace to seek liberation and freedom after seeing the suffering of the world and knowing that this was unacceptable to him, that beings suffered in this this way. He practiced for a number of years with great ascetics and meditation masters, and eventually left them because he wasn't finding the answer that he was seeking. And this was again all a play, according to Mahayana Buddhism, just the Buddha showing a path of awakening, of how one moves through the various understandings of moving away from the self-indulgence of the palace life, away from the self-mortification of the ascetic life, to find the middle way in one's behavior, so that one can then, with a strengthened body and good vitality, achieve realization. And so he sat under the Bodhi tree, the story goes, and he achieved enlightenment within that evening of this deep meditation that he engaged in. When he came out of his meditation, he said that what he had realized, the profundity of emptiness that was to be given as the medicine to all beings to alleviate their suffering, he felt it was almost too profound for beings to realize. And it said that he wandered for about 7 weeks, 49 days, and the gods of the god realms appeared and requested the Buddha to teach, said, that there are those whose veil of ignorance isn't so thick, that's somewhat thin, and they can hopefully realize this. So 5 of the ascetics that he practiced with, he reappeared to them, came into where they were staying, and they noticed something different about him. And he began to teach them. And it's said that through his teachings, these beings gained great realizations, and he imparted over the course of another 40 years, roughly, all the various teachings that have come to be known as the Buddha Dharma. Of course, the most central teaching that he gave was what's in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, as they're called, the Prajnaparamita Sutras. These are the sutras that the Buddha gave to, especially to bodhisattva disciples, though also to general disciples, others who were, hearing the Dharma and so on. And they mostly took place in a magical little territory called Rajgir on Vulture's Peak. This is where we saw that being mentioned in the Heart Sutra when we read it together today. This is where the bulk of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were given in terms of the Buddha transmitting these. And there's even these things said about, there are 3 really more extensive sutras, one in 8,000 lines, one in 25,000 stanzas, and last in 100,000 stanzas. All of these were said to be even given simultaneously. It's just that beings had different dispositions and they heard different teachings on the basis of those predispositions. So, but nonetheless, he gave this whole corpus of what's come to be known as the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which includes the Heart Sutra. And these sutras weren't at the forefront of the practice in the centuries after the Buddha's passing away. The Buddha showed that aspect of passing into nirvana after about 80, 81 years of life. And the teachings that were left behind were primarily the Pali Canon, which were adopted by those in the southeastern part of Asia, in Thailand and Laos and Burma and Indonesia. All of these were, kind of embracing that corpus of the Buddha's teachings. The Sanskrit teachings kind of disappeared for a while, and there is even a bit of a mythical story about how the teachings were kept in various realms, the bulk of them in the Naga realm. Nagas are these beings that are kind of like mermaids and mermen. They're sort of a water being, but they have a little bit greater karma than most animals that live in the water, or even animals on land for that. And so they were the holders, the keepers of this. And that's why Nagarjuna is said to have gone to the land of the Nagas to retrieve these teachings. And even when you see pictures of Nagarjuna, he has these snakes usually that are up above, because these are beings that are kind of snake-like. Describing them as mermaids or mermen maybe doesn't give full justice to how they are, what they actually look like. But nonetheless, this is the mythical side of where these teachings were. They were taught by the Buddha, but not actively practiced so much in this world, because they sort of disappeared from this world. Nagarjuna, again, his dates are very questionable. Sometime in the beginning of the Common Era, within 150 to 250 years of the Common Era, possibly even earlier. And he, again, was responsible for bringing the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which delineate this teaching on emptiness that we're going to be going into in this course, back into this world. And these verses, if you ever go back to any of them, Edward Kanze, who was a great Buddhist scholar back at the beginning of the transmission of Buddha Dharma in the West, translated some of these. And they're very terse. They're very hard to kind of get the meaning of, because the Buddha would sometimes use shorthand to talk to beings. He wouldn't always describe everything that was necessary to be in there. So Nagarjuna wrote an amazing text that's called The Fundamental Treatise of the Middle Way, where he goes into how to find this other type of middle way. I was talking about middle way earlier, that the Buddha practice that was Prince Siddhartha practice that was kind of between these two extremes of behavior, self-indulgence and self-mortification. Here, this is a middle way between two views. And they were even described in the video. That we have that one view that is, this is Venerable Rabina, she went into this, she said there is the view of kind of clinging to things so tightly, grasping at the glasses and the glassesness of it and thinking everything exists in this concrete way. Then we get teachings on emptiness and they pull us kind of away from that, but they can pull us over into this other extreme, which is the glasses don't exist at all. As she said, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Well, this teaching on the middle way is to find that perfect view in between those two. So we aren't falling into the error that we've been making. That is the root of all of our problems that I mentioned earlier. It's what causes us to have these other deluded states, to engage in karma, and to have the suffering from all of that. We can move away from that and not fall into the other precipice, the precipice of a nihilistic point of view, where we no longer think things exist at all. And in the space of that, then karma doesn't matter, actions don't matter, nothing matters because there is nothing. Emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is pointing to a particular view that is between those two extremes. Things do exist, but they don't exist in the way we think they do. And that's the key teachings that Nagarjuna expounded upon. This amazing text called, again, the Fundamental Treatise, or sometimes they shorten it to Fundamental Wisdom because it's a fundamental treatise on wisdom. But anyway, this text has about 27 chapters. It's really not that long, but he goes into expounding upon especially the technique of realizing emptiness through dependent arising, which was talked about at the end of the video too, right? We're going to go into that in about 2 weeks from now. And we talk about how that reasoning is used to help to understand how it is that things actually exist. That, as Jan Willis pointed out, they are dependent. They are not independent. So we are negating their independence, but never negating their existence. We're simply embracing existence within the understanding of dependence and all the subtleties that come to that. So again, we'll go into that in more detail, but this is what Nagarjuna is really renowned for. And of course, his teachings, he expounded on them himself, but there were also many great masters like Chandrakirti, who you may have heard of, who wrote a commentary on Nagarjuna's text, as well as a supplement to that, which goes into the perfection of wisdom in terms of how it is set out in the Bodhisattva path. And then there were many great other Indian masters. Nagarjuna was the abbot of Nalanda Monastery, which is renowned for this whole tradition. Even His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he says, if we want to point to what type of Buddhism we practice in Tibet, it's the Nalanda tradition. It comes out of this amazing beings who studied and taught at Nalanda Monastery in India, which is now ruins. I mean, it was destroyed somewhere along the line. Buddhism doesn't really exist in a sort of native form in India any longer. It's all transplants, people who've brought Buddhism back into India, like His Holiness and the Tibetan Buddhists who have all their monasteries in the southern part of India and so on. So anyway, that's the second figure. And again, he's sort of an in-between figure, but very important in terms of helping to reinvigorate the interest in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that the Buddha had taught all those centuries earlier. Of course, those teachings, if you look at them too, they're also a bit terse. They're also a bit hard to understand. That's why commentaries are needed. And that's why even Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the founder of our tradition, elaborated extensively on these teachings on emptiness in a couple of works that he did. We're going to maybe cite things here and there. He's renowned for having given great explanations of the entire stages of the path, all three of those levels we mentioned earlier, the small scope, the middle scope, the great scope. He covers all of them in these texts. And his most powerful statement on emptiness perhaps is in the great treatise, the great Lamrim Chenmo, which has now been published into English. It's not the sort of text that I would advise if you're new to Buddhism that you pick up to discern emptiness. I'll talk later about what texts we're going to use to work with emptiness in this course. But it is something that we should aspire to eventually get to, is to be able to read Tsongkhapa's commentaries on these great masters. He also wrote a commentary on Chandrakirti's text, which was based on Nagarjuna's text and so on. There's this whole lineage of teachers who give explanations of the meanings of all these things. And I've never heard a Tibetan teacher say this, but to me, this is part of what we have had to deal with in terms of people at the time of the Buddha, it seems, could be given very, very terse statements, and they would instantly have these realizations. I mean, amazing minds they must have been. They say India at that time was a real hotbed of philosophical inquiry. That's like 2,500 years ago, and of course, we are so deeply ingrained in Western civilization that it's hard for us to even fathom what was going on in the West in most of these countries, while Asia was going through this amazing renaissance in terms of all of the thinking that was happening there. But it seems that people at the time of the Buddha were really quite sharp faculty. They could get it right away. Then, add on a few more centuries and people are getting a bit duller perhaps. And so Nagarjuna has to come along and explain everything's a bit differently. And then, several centuries later, Tsongkhapa has to come along and give us these huge explanations. It just seems that, again, we're dealing with, to some degree, a degeneration in our ability to have this because we aren't living in societies that embrace philosophical inquiry. And that, of course, is where this all came from, was the Buddha's own, as Prince Siddhartha, investigating the nature of reality through the teachings that he grew up with in the Vedic traditions and so on, but then wanting to discern something deeper. Well, again, I'm just pointing out that that's one reason why we have this lineage that looks like this, that can be so condensed in terms of some of the sutras, become a little bit more explained in terms of the commentaries from the Indian tradition. And then when you get to the Tibetan tradition, you need these huge commentaries sometimes to explain these teachings. And of course, now we have all these great practitioners in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, like His Holiness and like Lama Zopa, who've published many things that help us to get at the meaning of this. It's not an easy topic, but we can gain some appreciation for its authoritative quality by acknowledging all the people that have been, setting out teachings on this through their own realizations, through their own understanding. And we're standing on the shoulders of those giants, as they say. Without all those great masters of the past, we wouldn't have an ability to discern the meaning of this so clearly. So we can be grateful for this and acknowledge all the beings that sort of supported this. So one other thing I want to touch on today as well is to really give something I usually do as part of Module 9, but I revisit it here in this module because it gives us an appreciation for why it's necessary to realize emptiness. And that has to do with, I tried to put together a little diagram with now that I can do something more creative on a PowerPoint. That gives us an analogy for how we can look at this. I even used this analogy the other night when I was teaching on the Wednesday class. And this is the idea of the tree of samsara, or the tree of conditioned existence that we are involved in. And we see, I've managed to find a graphic that had sort of fruits on the tree as well as the roots, which is two of the important elements of this. So let's go down to the very bottom where the roots are. And we see that the root of this entire conditioned existence we're involved in is the ignorance that clings to the I, the self, the person, and all phenomena to be truly or inherently existent. We're going to come to understand what this means by saying truly or inherently existent. But the idea behind it is that things have an ability to establish themselves, to set themselves up, that their identity rests on the side of the object as opposed to any kind of subjective involvement in them, any kind of other factors that play a role, that they sort of stand on their own, that they have their own thingness or something. They have that entity from their own side, that identity. Things do have an identity, but that identity doesn't exist in the way that we think it does. It also certainly appears in a fictitious way. We're going to get into this more in terms of understanding what is all involved in that ignorance arising. But that ignorance is one that we have had since beginningless time, according to the Buddha. We've always had that sort of stain in our minds. It's not quite like an original sin concept that I grew up with in Catholicism. Whoops, that was an earlier version that I didn't like quite as much. Let me stop the share, which is what I wanted to do. It isn't quite the same concept as like an original sin, but it is the idea that there has always been some fault in our minds that is due to the presence of this ignorance that we've never addressed, that is the root of all of our problems. If we had been able to address it, we could turn that around really quickly and destroy the roots of the tree, and thereby the whole tree would cease to exist. Everything else that happens in conditioned existence is rooted in this misconception. The whole purpose of this course is really to help us to, one, understand what that misconception is, and two, develop the techniques that help us to address it, to rectify it. This is one of the most amazing things about emptiness. Emptiness is not said to be some sort of mystical thing that only, beings from some magical place can realize. Every one of us can realize this topic. The Buddha even said that there are three categories of phenomena, things that exist. One of them is the stuff that's quite evident and obvious to us. This is computers and colors and shapes and everything around us and sounds and everything that exists that appears to our senses is pretty much, in that category. It's something that is manifest to us, that is very easy to understand and apprehend. Then there are two levels of hidden phenomena. The first one are the non-hidden, the manifest phenomena. The other two are hidden, but it's a matter of degrees as to what extent they're hidden. Emptiness falls into slightly hidden phenomena. Even impermanence, which we've studied in Discovering Buddhism prior to this, but impermanence is referring to, at a subtle level, the fact that everything that is conditioned, this bowl that I rang earlier, this is a conditioned phenomenon. It arises from its causes and conditions. It's impermanent, not meaning that it won't last forever, though that is often the case, and this won't last forever, as durable as it looks, but we moreover mean that it changes moment by moment. There is a process of change going on at the molecular and submolecular, atomic, subatomic, whatever, all that sort of very deep level. There's a change going on at that level that we're not discerning at all. But that's happening with these bodies, and of course we do notice them. I was mentioning that in the video, right? We see Venerable Rabina 20 years ago, very youthful and vibrant. And you see her now, she's still extremely vibrant, but she looks a lot different, right? There's a different appearance. That's because the body is constantly changing. It doesn't mean that it took that, we see the video and that's how she was, then, and then she's hit this way now, and there's nothing happening in between. There's obviously change happening every moment in between. This is something that they do say is a nice precursor to realizing emptiness, is because it helps us to understand that the way things appear as solid and unchanging isn't how they actually exist, that things are changing all the time. While we sit here, these 2 hours together, our bodies have gone through 2 hours of change every single moment. Cells changing, cells dying, new ones growing, and so on. All of this happening with this basis we call the body. Okay, so that's, one teaching that we can begin to understand. But the deeper ignorance that we have, again, is thinking that things have some sort of fixed nature, something from their side that determines what they are. And this, of course, is what we have to develop a deeper appreciation for and an understanding of, because that error is causing us the deepest form of suffering. And that, too, is only slightly hidden if we can begin to use these techniques to see it. As Richard Gere was pointing out in his, sharing in that video, he's already gained some appreciation for how he can apply that in his everyday life and not feel so caught up in things, not feel so, Venerable Karen was talking about the attachment. Attachment is rooted in our ignorance. We won't have attachment if we can bring to mind this wisdom. Now, there are many other techniques to counteract our attachment and our hatred, our anger. That's what we'll go into tomorrow in the perfection of patience. But nonetheless, the wisdom of emptiness is the final antidote to everything. Why? Because ignorance is at the root of everything. Let's go back to our little diagram and get to the next level. What arises on the basis of ignorance? In my analogy, I put this to the trunk. The trunk of the tree includes both the wholesome and unwholesome thoughts we cultivate within our ignorance. We could also say it includes the neutral thoughts. There are some thoughts we have that are not generated with any particular positive or negative energy. But this would include the unwholesome thoughts such as anger, attachment that I was mentioning, that desire, that greed, jealousy, pride, all the various things that arise that are negative states of mind are rooted in ignorance. But even the wholesome and positive thoughts that we have, the mind of generosity, the mind of compassion, the mind of loving kindness, for as long as sentient beings haven't addressed that fundamental ignorance, they frequently are together with ignorance. I mean, I know it sounds kind of outrageous because we don't hold that they are to be eliminated. And that's one of the things about this error with looking at this analogy of a tree. We're not trying to uproot the whole tree and get rid of any positive thoughts. But the idea is that those positive thoughts within conditioned existence, within the root of ignorance, are only going to give rise to samsaric experiences. They're only going to give rise to something that is within the tree of samsara. If we ever want to attain liberation or nirvana, as well as enlightenment, we have to uproot this. We have to stop having that grounding of ignorance for these thoughts. And eventually they will, of course, once we remove that ignorance, the unwholesome thoughts don't have any ground at all. The wholesome thoughts can still be upheld. Why? Because they are not grounded in ignorance from the point of view of their mode of ascertaining things. Compassion is looking at sentient beings and wanting them to be free from suffering. Nothing wrong with that. We're just clinging to sentient beings as real within that. And that's, again, is what makes it a cause within samsara. So as long as we have the root of ignorance, these two things that come up within the trunk that are wholesome actions or unwholesome actions, or I'm sorry, wholesome thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, these are going to be still grounded within that. So the results they're going to give us are only within conditioned existence. So again, we'll talk more about how those are upheld within the wisdom of emptiness, because I think it is important that we understand why you can still have positive thoughts, compassion, loving kindness, and so on within the sphere of understanding emptiness. The third, the branches, the things that kind of branch off from the trunk, are karma in this analogy. These are the virtuous and non-virtuous actions we create with those thoughts. Now, again, hopefully we've already gained some appreciation for karma through earlier study, especially in the Lam Rim. We look at karma early on because it helps us to have better fruits of our actions. It helps us to have less suffering in our lives because karma is the determinant of our experiences. It is what causes you to have favorable or unfavorable or even neutral experiences. So on the basis of thoughts, some of the times those thoughts become actions in and of themselves because they become very powerful thoughts. So in that way, we could say our thoughts are also karma, but we also, of course, engage in physical actions, verbal actions. Those are the branches of those thoughts that bring forth fruit, that bring forth experiences of our that are based on those actions. And that's the fourth thing, the fruits, those red dots on there. Maybe it would have been nice to find one that had red dots and black dots or something, or something that was contrasting. One of them being the suffering we experience and the other being the happiness we experience from karma. And they are corresponding respectively to the virtuous and non-virtuous actions we engage in. And those are respectively generated on the basis of wholesome and unwholesome thoughts. But all of that is rooted in ignorance. So this is what we are engaged in. And there's nothing wrong with manipulating our karma to get good fruits, to have to experience more of what is wholesome and positive and beneficial in our lives as opposed to what causes us greater suffering and discomfort and what have you. It just doesn't get you off the tree. It doesn't get you outside of the experience of that. To get rid of the entire tree, you have to uproot it through generating the wisdom of emptiness that undermines that ignorance. So it works as an analogy to some degree. Again, most analogies are not perfect because, as I said, I don't mean by this that you're going to remove all wholesome thoughts and wholesome results of our thoughts and so on. Those will still be upheld within the wisdom of emptiness. But right now, because we don't have that wisdom, all that we do that is wholesome and positive, everything you did that brought about this amazing human life that you have right now, as we saw in earlier modules, that came about through good karma. That came about through your practice of good morality, through your generosity. You have resources in your life. Every one of you have a home over your head right now. You have money in the bank. You have things that you can draw upon for the comfort of this life. That came about through your practice of generosity. But because your generosity wasn't practiced with the wisdom of emptiness, it's only going to bring forth results within samsaric experience, within conditioned existence. So we want, and we looked in module 9 about moving away from that model of being caught up in all of this towards nirvana, towards the peace that comes when we remove all of that ignorance that's at the root. In that module, though, we didn't go extensively into this wisdom. The wisdom of emptiness is needed for either result. It's needed for the attainment of your own liberation, your own solitary peace, nirvana. It's also needed for the mind, developing enlightenment, for becoming a Buddha. We have to have that wisdom realizing emptiness to first remove our own faults that are causing this problem, and then to remove the deeper faults, the deeper obscurations that keep us from benefiting others to the greatest degree, that keep us from achieving our greatest potential. So I also go into this a little bit when we get further on in the course as to how this wisdom manifests in terms of our path, and eventually can help us to achieve not only our own liberation, removing that tree of samsara through uprooting it completely, but it can also help us to achieve enlightenment. It's an essential component. Remember the analogy of the two wings of the bird that Venerable Rabbeinu often uses. We have to have this wing of wisdom, without a doubt. But when we accompany it with the compassionate motivation of bodhicitta to benefit others, then we've got both wings to fly all the way to enlightenment, as opposed to simply attaining our own peace, our own liberation. So this is, again, why are we studying this topic? Because it's so important. It is unique to Buddhism too. There are many philosophers in the West who've gotten close to this concept to some degree, I think, maybe like Wittgenstein and these, people who were questioning things in the world and how things exist and what have you. It's a sort of ontological investigation. How do things actually exist? But they didn't go so far as what the Buddha did. And the Buddha's teachings on emptiness are really quite important if we are to give this path, everything that it's due and practice it completely. It's very easy in my mind to practice some of the other teachings, but the teachings on emptiness, again, can be quite challenging. I'll share one little story on this before we go through some of the handouts and stuff. This was in France. I mentioned this story recently. I think maybe some of you heard it then. But I was teaching at teachings with His Holiness, and there was this, it was like 7 days of teachings, and there was this amazing Catholic monk who was in these beautiful white robes, and he was present there towards the front of the audience where His Holiness was. And His Holiness started having a conversation with him in the middle of some teachings. And then this was at the very beginning of the week. And he said, that it's very good that this monk is here, this Catholic monk, learning more about what Buddhism has to teach about compassion and, connecting with others and one's actions and all this. He says, but when it comes to emptiness, that's none of your business. I mean, it was really clear. His Holiness said it, looking right at him like, that's none of your business. And to some degree, this is true. This is not Christian business. This is not Hindu business, Islamic business, Jewish business, whatever. I mean, it's not to put those traditions down. It's just that this is a teaching that is unique to the Buddhist perspective, the Buddhist view of what I just explained, the tree of conditioned existence that we're involved in, why we are in this state. Everyone throughout time has always pondered, why do we suffer? Why do beings suffer? Well, the Buddhist view is we suffer because of our own fault. And if we can correct that fault, because it's completely correctable through reasoning, through analysis, through understanding, well then, especially when we unite it with deeper concentration, then we can succeed in that process. We can overcome our suffering. Moreover, we can be dedicated to helping others to do the same. So this is the idea behind why we're going to look at concentration first and then wisdom, is because it is important that we review briefly how to develop a very deep concentration that can be the support for that wisdom, so that then you can have a profound impact on your minds. And hopefully, we'll all be able to do that, if not in this lifetime, at least very soon, so that we can achieve that state. So any questions before I go to some of the handouts, just to look at what is all out there so I can direct you to the right things? Let me share the screen then with what the Dropbox looks like, and I won't go through all of that, but essentially just know that at the Dropbox, wow, it comes out really small, but you can see that there's a number of meditations. The first few are meditations and so on. Then there's some handouts that are down here that are like the wisdom of emptiness. I think this is the first one I want to go to. So actually, yeah, I think I can share it from here. Oh, no, that's the assessment questions. That's not what I wanted to pull up. Let me actually pull them up from the PDF files. It'll be easier. But know that that's where you get those. You go to the online, the page at TNL's website, and you'll see the online link that you joined through today. Right underneath that is the materials link. Click on that. You'll go to Dropbox. You don't need to get a Dropbox account to download things from there. At least you shouldn't need to get one. You just essentially go there and you click on the files that you want. You can go ahead and download them all, but I'm going to give you a little guidance as to what you need for today's class and for, kind of the overview of the class. So let's go into our the PDF thing here. The very first handout that you might want to take a good look at and sort of have in front of you throughout this course is the course outline. I always do one of these because I think it's helpful for people to know where you're going and what's happening. There's a little quote from Rinpoche at the top that you might read later. You'll see that today's class is on there as the overview of the course, the perfection of wisdom and the need for this special insight on the basis of what I just explained, what's at the root of all of our problems. Next week, we'll go into developing concentration to strengthen the power of our wisdom. Class 3, we'll look at undermining that ignorance with the reasoning of dependent arising that I mentioned earlier. And that was also mentioned in the video. And then we'll look in the next class about doing that with the 4-point analysis. And then talk a little bit about how things actually exist and the concept of the two truths, that there is a conventional level of reality and an ultimate level of reality. And then finally, the final class will be a catch-up if I haven't, stayed up to speed with all the other topics. We'll catch up a bit, as well as talk about how we apply this in our everyday life, and then maybe throw in a few other topics. The next one that you might take a look at is called the reading list. So the first one is called the overview. I had course outline on there, but it's essentially overview, I think is the name of the file. Module 12 overview, or wisdom of emptiness overview. The reading list, these are for, again, those of you who would like to go deeper into your studies of this or want to do certification. There is a set of readings that the FPMT again put together for the entirety of DB. For all 14 modules, remember I mentioned 13 teaching modules, there's a 14th one that has practices that Rinpoche advises people to do in conjunction with their study. But know that all of this, which is some 400 plus pages of material, can be downloaded from the FPMT shop. I think there is a small fee for it, like $7.50 or something. It's not much at all. But know that that's an offering that helps to support our organization in terms of future materials, what have you. The main book that I want you to work with, though, is How to See Yourself as You Really Are, this wonderful book that His Holiness the Dalai Lama published with Jeffrey Hopkins helping him out, who's a great scholar of Tibetan Buddhism. It's really useful to read along with this, and I do have the chapters indicated in the reading assignments that you can follow along and do that. Again, you can download it as a Kindle or other devices, I'm sure, and then you can also obtain a copy. It's in paperback. There may even be some hardbound editions, but anyway, you can figure that out from on your own. There are also 2 free teachings that come from the FPMT's Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. And so I've put the address in the file for those. You can link to those and download them for free, I believe. If you want to obtain a hard copy, they're very minimal and cost like 99 cents, but you will have to pay shipping on that from Boston where they're shipped. But just know that, again, these are some readings from the first one, Virtue and Reality, and then there are the entirety of the book from How Things Exist, number 4 there on the list. Number 5 is the book that we use throughout most of Discovering Buddhism. It's called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Most of you have a copy. It's in the most recent one is the blue edition, but I put the references to the gold edition, which was it's just so that people know in the reading assignments where those sections fall in terms of page numbers in that earlier version, just in case you have an older version of that. There's also some optional reading that, again, for this, know that some of these books do get a little more heady, especially the last one. But the first and the second one, you might find also useful in your study of emptiness. But if you read His Holiness's book, that's great. If you can't read if you don't have time to do any additional reading, like I said, that's fine. Just know that I'll be making references to His Holiness's book frequently, and I'll try to put those things on the screen so that I can share them with all of you if you don't have a copy. This is what I was saying earlier is the reading and meditation assignments. Again, let me just go to the first one, and then you'll see the other ones are very similar. The first one for today is if you can obtain a copy of How to See Yourself as You Really Are, read parts 1 and 3. 2 you're going to read later. Just know that I wanted you to read 1 and 3 because that'll prepare you to talk about concentration. It's chapters 1 through 3 and 8 and 9. And then if you can read a little bit in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. There's also a meditation that is in the shared materials called the Meditation on the I, which is a nice way to begin to explore this idea of where is this I? What is this I? It already gets you into the ballpark of thinking about emptiness. For each one of the following dates, I generally have reading assignments that are good to do in advance for the next class. So again, these would be what are assigned next week to do for the class on the 28th. I'm sorry, I should say these, the ones on the 14th are what to do for the 21st. The ones on the 21st are what to do for the 28th. The ones on the 28th are what to do for December 5th, and so on. When you get to the final one, of course, there's no additional readings. There's just a meditation. But the meditation is there for each of these, and all of those meditations have been posted to the materials page, the link in Dropbox. The assessment questions are if you'd like to do this to kind of get some feedback on your own ascertainment of these subjects and the topics we're going through, you can do those. If you are doing certification, then they are required, and it's good for you to do those and turn them into me. But this is just, again, what level of study you want to engage in. The next one that I have on the screen is the handout that is the meditation for this week. Again, it's called Meditation on the I. It's called Meditation 3B because this was how it was set out by Thupten Pende in his transcripts from when he did, again, the online course for Discovering Buddhism. So again, it's even though it's 3B, it's the one I want you to start with. There will be a new meditation for next week. But this is the one that I would encourage you to work with over the next week. Whoops. So you'll see that there's a preparation, which is doing meditation on the breath. And then there's a body of the meditation, which is once you've calmed your mind, reflect on that. You might read this through in advance if you're not familiar with these meditations, maybe even highlight a few passages in yellow or something that will stick out to you when you're sitting at your meditation place. And then, ask these questions to yourself, do this investigation and see what comes up in terms of looking at this sense of an I. And then there's finally a dedication. So again, these pages are part of the Discovering Buddhism at Home or the online teachings. That's why they've got 77 and 78, but I pulled them from various sources to use throughout this course. So this is one that I think is nice for people to start with. And that's a chart. You'll see that we'll get into that chart next week. You might download that chart and have it in front of you, print it out or have it on your device that you can access. I will try to, again, access things during the classes, but you might find it useful to make notes on this. These are the charts related to the practice of calm abiding, which is the form of concentration that we want to ideally develop. So those are the ones that I wanted to introduce you to today. Everything else that's out there will come up in future classes. I didn't want to go through all of them, but essentially you have that overview, the reading list, the reading and meditation assignments. Those give you kind of the guide for the entire course, and I'm sure all of you can use that to some degree. And maybe you don't do all the reading now, but it'd be good for you to have that list so you can go back to and read again in the future if you want to review things. Then we have the assessment questions, again, for those who are wanting to do this more seriously, the meditation for this week, the meditation on the I, and then again, the chart that you might want to have printed out or handy for next week when we talk about concentration. Are there any questions on the materials or anything else?
Excuse me, Don?
Sure, Margaret.
I was just wondering, are the materials on the website?
Yeah, so if you go to tnlsf.org, probably where you went to link to this class today, the very front page is where, right now, if you went in there, it should list my class for today on the front marquee or whatever. Click on Wisdom of Emptiness. That will take you to a second page. The second page will have a picture of me. But anyway, you scroll down, go beyond the picture, forget the picture, scroll down, and there's where there was the online link for today. Just underneath that, I believe, is the materials link. Yeah, I want to go ahead and I'll go ahead and show you just to be sure. Pull it up on, where is the, yeah, here. Okay, so if I go to TNLSF, there's the home page. Scroll down and you'll see here Wisdom of Emptiness underneath my picture there. That's where it is today. Again, that keeps moving because as we go through day by day, things disappear. That'll get you to this page that's called Wisdom of Emptiness as well. Oops, went down too far. There you'll see that as you scroll down, there's the online link and the materials link. You click on the materials link, and that's where you go to that page I had up earlier, where it's got all these files in the tiny, tiny print there. So you see there's a lot of files for this course, quite a few, 11 files or so. But again, you don't need to have them all right now, just the ones that I mentioned. But you might go ahead and download them all and then just pull them up as you need them throughout this course. All right? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Margaret. Yeah. And know that this is so for all the other courses we do here. Like for tomorrow's course, there's a little handout on patience that you can find. If there are any materials that are available for students in general, they will be on that link. My hope is to also publish the PowerPoints or anything else that I decide to share on that same Dropbox page. So if there are additional things, they'll be out there. Any other questions or comments? Everything's copacetic? Okay, good. All right, let's do some prayers then. Mary will share the dedication prayers so that we can conclude today's time together. Again, bringing to mind all of what we've done over these last 2 hours, turning our minds towards this profound topic with a desire to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So now we reconnect with that mind of bodhicitta and dedicate for that result, thinking that through what we have done here today, that this will become the cause for all beings to attain complete freedom from suffering and to achieve enlightenment. So we're going to do that in particular by reciting this wonderful prayer from Master Shantideva's text that encompasses all these temporal ways that we want to benefit others, but think again that we're also dedicating for all beings to be free from suffering and to achieve enlightenment. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Let's turn our attention to these teachers who are living in our day and age, who are sort of carrying the banner of these teachings that I mentioned earlier from Shakyamuni Buddha, Nagarjuna, Lama Tsongkhapa. We need these teachers to continue to be in this world. So we're making strong prayers from our side to create that karma, to create the causes and conditions for them to have good health and long lives. So as we recite this for these specific teachers, think that we're creating the causes for all spiritual guides to have good health and long lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then lastly for Osohita, who is the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe, who was the founder of our organization. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And lastly, let's dedicate for anyone that we're holding in our hearts right now. No doubt every one of us have beings that we know who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died. Extend this energy that we've created out to them so that it becomes the cause to remove their sufferings immediately, and for them to also achieve all the conditions that will help them to develop their hearts and minds fully. And may all beings accomplish that same task through what we've done here today. Thank you all so much for joining for today. One thing I might say before we conclude is please don't take from anything I'm saying that I have any great realizations of this topic. I'm not a great master of emptiness, and I really, one of the things I emphasize, and I'll probably do it again at the end of all of this, really emphasize receiving teachings on emptiness from great masters who've actually realized this, like Lama Zopa and His Holiness. You know, so important that we kind of get that experiential component of it. I can talk to it intellectually from my own study, which is even somewhat limited, but I can't really speak to the experiential side as much, you know, so we need those other great guides to give us that as well. So please don't make any assumptions about my realizations whatsoever. The fact I'm teaching this or teaching the Wednesday night class on emptiness doesn't mean that I've realized this topic to any degree, just have some inkling of an understanding. So all right, thank you all so much, and I'll see some of you, I'm sure, over the next week. Otherwise, definitely next Saturday. And by the way, we haven't scheduled a practice day for this because the online thing always just makes it a little complicated to do that. I did that for Module 8, and we just went through the practice we were using there, and it seemed to work okay. But for this, I think it might be a bit challenging. But if you all would like to do something in a more formal way after the end of this, maybe we'll see if we can find a time to do that, because we didn't put it into the calendar in a formal way. But anyway. All right, be well. And again, take care. See you soon. Be safe.